Let's start by creating our start interface. All UI elements in Unity have to live on what is called a canvas element. So first, let's go to Create and go to UI and select Canvas. This will put a canvas element into our scene. But as you can see, there's nothing in it and it's huge. That's because canvases in Unity automatically default to the screen space. What we need to do for VR is adjust this UI so that it lives in the world space. So you go to this drop down here and select World Space. You may notice that the canvas is still enormous. Let's scale it down to an appropriate size to see in our VR scene. I like to go with 0.1, 0.1, 0.1. And let's position it back in a place where we can see it. Awesome. You may notice that the canvas is still enormous. Let's scale it down to an appropriate size to see in our scene when we're in VR. I like to go with 0.01 to start out with for each of the scale parameters. And let's reset it at 0, 0, right in the middle of our scene. You can see that that's still a little bit big for us, so why don't we make that 0.001, 01, and 01. Awesome. So now it's starting to look like a slightly more appropriate size for a UI element inside VR. Now, there's nothing on this canvas yet, so let's go ahead and put a background color on there to make it stand out against other items in the scene. To do this, we go to Create, UI, Panel. You can adjust the color of this panel in the inspector. I'm going to go with black. And you want to make sure to have the alpha all the way up so that it's completely opaque. Awesome. Now, let's add some of the interface elements from our sketches. Since in my interface I have some text, I'll start by going to Create, UI, and adding a text element to the canvas, then positioning it similarly to how it was in my sketch. Although right now we can't see it, so let's change its color to white. Now, let's add some of the interface elements from our sketches. Since in my interface I have some text, I'll start by going to Create, UI, and adding a text element to my canvas. Now, you'll notice that it's very hard to read and it is very tiny. So why don't we fix that? I'm going to make this a nice white color so it has high contrast against my black background. And then I'm going to increase my text size to, let's say, 120. Now, it's disappeared because it's overflowing, so in the horizontal and vertical overflow menus, select Overflow. Great. And there it is. Now, in VR, we don't have as much display density as we would on a normal screen. So on my computer this looks great, but on a mobile device it might be really blurry. So what we want to do is to avoid using thin typefaces and to make sure it's nice and big. So I'm going to make this bold, and why don't we actually make it just a little bit bigger? I'll bump it up to 145. Great. So I think that'll probably be very easy to read in VR. And finally, let's change it from new text to Welcome to Puzzler, and reposition it so that it is centered on our canvas. Alright, awesome. Next, I'll be adding a button since I have one in my sketches. We do this the same way as any other UI element by going to the Create menu and selecting Button from the UI flyout. Now, as you can see, this button is also very small, so let's increase the width and height so it's a lot easier for us to see. I'm going to make this 500 wide, and let's call it 200 tall. Now, using your sketch as a reference, you're going to want to position and size this button so that it matches up with your sketch. In my sketch, this button says Start, and the text size is definitely a little bigger. Something like that looks good. Then, we want to make sure that it's aligned approximately the same as in my sketch. So I'm going to go to Button and just center align it visually like that. There's one remaining element in my sketch that needs to get put in, and that's the byline explaining what the app is for. So I'm just going to copy and paste my title text, bring it down a little bit, and make it the same relative size as it was in my sketch. This one is going to say, press start to begin. And going to align that to the center, and we're almost there. So I want you to look at the aspect ratio of the panel in your sketch. Was it a square? Was it a rectangle? Was it another shape? And try to get the overall shape of the canvas to match. In my sketch, it's more of a rectangular shape, so I'm going to be adjusting the height of this canvas element just like that. Now that's starting to look a lot better. Alright, rock on! We've successfully transferred the sketch that we made in the real world into a digital user interface in Unity. Now, I'm going to ask you to repeat this entire process for your Restart UI. You can get a head start by copying your Start UI and modifying the elements that are already in there. So I'm just going to hide this, and then we can modify our other element. You'll probably want to pause the video while you do this. Right, now position both your UI elements so that they're separate but near the camera. And at this point, I want you to load a build onto your device and check it in VR. See if the text is legible, if the buttons are big enough for you to hit them, and make any adjustments you need to in Unity afterwards. At this point, you should load up a build onto your device and check to see if the text is readable, the buttons are big enough to be hit, and in general, just making sure that everything's on the up and up in VR. If it's not, or if you have any issues, make sure to go back to Unity, fix the problems, and load it back onto your device again. Now, you may notice that the buttons in our canvases don't do anything yet, but we're about to fix that.